All right, so good night, guys. I know that everybody is tired, everybody wants to go to sleep and stuff like that, but just bear with me for the next few minutes as I run through these slides and try to make this as interesting as possible. Okay, so I guess we all know about this information here. This is the West Indies. The West Indies is an archipelago comprising of over 7,000 islands, of which it's broken down into three sections. You have the Bahama Islands, the Greater Antilles, and the Lesser Antilles. It is also one of 34 biological hotspots slash biodiversity hotspots, and you have high levels of endemism here. All right. So tourists love the Caribbean. They love the sun, the sand, and the sea, and they really love the wildlife. As you can see in this picture here, sometimes they do things that they should not be doing, like feeding our rock iguanas. But this is something that has been occurring now for a long time and needs to be addressed. But as you can see in magazines like this, they do show an interest in our wildlife. And when visitors come, like students and stuff like that, because that's another form of tourism, they come to learn about our wildlife. As you can see here, you got some students from the university, from Miami University, who showed an interest in our snakes. And the Bahamas also has a good number of endemic animals as well. So you have about 89 endemic plants, 11 endemic snakes, 1 endemic frog, 13 endemic lizards, including 7 endemic types of iguanas, and 6 endemic birds. And some people like our wildlife so much that they're going to try and take it out of the country illegally. In this case, this medical doctor, was caught trying to smuggle 3 Bahamian Andros boas in his luggage. And he got caught when the scans showed that there was some real interesting skeleton skeleton x-rays in his luggage. So he got caught and was charged for that. Okay, and this is a beautiful Andros boa. And of course, we know about this story here, which Mrs. Buckner has been, who has really explained to us very well. These are the 2 young ladies, the 2 young Romanian women who were responsible for trying to smuggle the iguanas, who actually successfully smuggled the iguanas out of this country and were caught at Heathrow Airport. Now, it's important for me to note that these 2 young ladies they were what we call a mule, or mules, because they were being paid by somebody in Switzerland to come to the Bahamas and collect our iguanas to take out of the country. So there are people who are coming to the Bahamas not just to really enjoy our wildlife, but they're scoping out the islands. They're looking to see which islands has what, and then they're doing a lot of homework to relay that information out to key people in various locations in the world so that they can find ways to get the animals out of the country. But it's not just happening in the Bahamas, as everybody knows. The Caribbean also has wildlife smuggling issues as well. In Trinidad, for example, this is a chestnut-bellied seed finch. And what people do is, this bird has a very melodious song, and so what they do is they capture this bird, and they have these competitions in which the bird that has the most varied song is the winner, and you could get as much as $15,000 plus if your bird sings the most pretty song. And so it's a lucrative business, and this bird is actually from South America. Okay, so why does the issue of wildlife trafficking / smuggling, why does this continue? Well, one is a lack of prioritization at the national level. The other would be a lack of sustained public education. We would start some education, and then we would discontinue it because of a whole bunch of situations, funding being a major problem. Need for better collaboration between NGOs and the government, and enforcement and zero tolerance needs to be implemented, as well as a lot of the wildlife enforcers have a weak knowledge of wildlife in the country, and we have numerous islands and keys to monitor. And we just don't have the resources to do that type of high-level monitoring. But there are also other types of smuggling as well that a lot of people may not be aware. One is diplomatic smuggling. Diplomats come to the country and they return home in their countries with wildlife in their diplomatic luggage. Then you have commercial exporters exceeding the number on their permits or adding extra species on their permits. And then you have what some people from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CITES would call vial in pocket smuggling, and this is done by some researchers. And then you have others that smuggle the animals to support captive bred, the captive bred trade. So they would say that these animals have been bred in captivity and they're being sent to different places when in actuality the parent animals were illegally smuggled from countries like the Bahamas. And so this is where one program that I am in comes in. The Conservation Leadership in the Caribbean program is a program that is dedicated to training future conservation leaders to deal with important conservation issues in the Caribbean. In this case, it was 20 students from 20 participants from 13 countries across the Caribbean, as well as parts of Central and South America, and we divided the 20 participants into 5 groups, and each group covered a particular topic. The topic being that I'm in, of course, is traffic. And so I'm working with 3 lovely young ladies from Trinidad. Okay, so the 2 countries, like I mentioned, is the Bahamas and Trinidad. What makes this so interesting is that according to Defenders of Wildlife, which is an agency that's looking at wildlife smuggling across the globe, the Bahamas is the 5th largest supplier of illegal wildlife to the U.S. in the Caribbean and Latin American countries. And Trinidad is a large importer of wildlife, illegal wildlife. So in the Bahamas, we have a bunch of agencies that are that assist in us trying to deal with this issue. You have the Bahamas National Trust, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, airport authorities in both countries. These are the agencies that we're currently trying to stay in contact with and focus our work with. And so in the Bahamas, we do have several laws that deal with wildlife in our country, such as CITES, the Wildlife Animals Act, Wild Birds Act, Wildlife Conservation and Trade Act, and the Fisheries Resources, the Jurisdiction and Conservation Act. And in Trinidad and Tobago, they also have several acts and policies that are involved in the protection of wildlife in the country, as well as the import and export of specimens, species. Okay? So in both countries, these are species of high importance, high priority species. The Bahama parrot and our rock iguanas are Appendix 1 species, according to CITES, IUCN red list species. The Bahamian boas and Appendix 2, the chestnut belly seed finch and the blue and gold macaw are least concerned species, but these are also, and the white-fronted capuchin are high on the list of species being smuggled into the country from places like Venezuela. And we must not forget that besides live wild animals, you also have products that can be smuggled out of countries as well, with conch being a huge one in the Bahamas. So our project. So we're focusing on live wild animal trafficking in the Bahamas and Trinidad. And we basically have 3 phases, the planning, implementation, and monitoring phase. Our expectation is really to see if there's an increase in detection of wild animals trafficked and a reduction in wild animals trafficked, and the change of enforcement agency attitude. So we are going to be working with the enforcers in both of our countries. So our current plan is still ongoing. We're still conversing with enforcers, and we plan on developing basically a curriculum that uses the information we gather from the agencies. From that curriculum, we could help to train enforcers from at least 2 agencies, for example, Customs as well as the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, because both of those are pivotal in trying to collect or trying to apprehend suspects guilty of illegal wildlife trafficking or wildlife trafficking. And then we want to train the enforcers about wildlife and wildlife laws and introduce our trafficked wildlife identification guide. The enforcers, after the training, we will give the enforcers a wildlife certification and then do some monthly checkups to gauge the training success. So basically, we want to get the enforcers trained, and the idea for this actually came from the gentleman in the front audience, Mr. Pericles Melis, who made mention of this while I was having a conversation with him, and he spoke about the need for basically naturalist enforcers or naturalist officers in the enforcement agencies who can actually ID wildlife. And so this is just an example of our species identification key that we plan on giving the enforcers to help them after the training, to help them with the apprehension of species. It gives you the general information of the species, the red list, and the CITES list as well, basic characteristics of it. And so there have been several challenges involved with this topic with our project. One is the interviews with leaders of enforcement. This was a challenge because it's kind of difficult to get in contact with these persons. And when we do get in contact with these persons, their time doesn't quite match with our time because both parties do have an insanely busy schedule. So trying to find a time in which it works good for both of us was a major issue. It still is a major issue. A lot of the agencies, from talking with the Royal Bahamas Police Force and Defense Force, for example, they lack the knowledge of wildlife in the country. Basically, they were saying that they don't know, and also it's not a priority. If they had to choose between human firearms and looking for some iguanas, obviously they're going to go for the firearms, even though the iguanas also have high priority and are worth a lot of money. Numerous islands and keys for these guys to really try and keep an eye on. We have numerous ports throughout the country, and it's really hard for enforcement agencies to monitor all these ports because of these keys, as well as in Trinidad as well. There's a whole lot of issues with the enforcement agencies there and their knowledge of wildlife. As well as wildlife population still needs assessments. We don't know all of the information about all of our wildlife in the country, so we don't know which ones are really threatened, which ones are really critically endangered, as such. And so we have been continuously working with some of our partners, being a part of the Wildlife Advisory Committee, helped me to really get an idea as to the scope of this wildlife trafficking problem, as well as laws that deal with wildlife in the country, as well as in Trinidad, speaking with the Forestry Department, which also is responsible for helping to deal with illegal wildlife smuggling. So anticipated outcomes would be a stronger partnership and relationship between the enforcers, as well as more efficient documentation of smuggled species. We do know that there's a couple agencies that do record, but we're not 100% sure that all of the agencies are recording information. And I could basically justify that because some of the agencies have already told me that they aren't really looking for it. So if you're not looking for it, then you ain't really doing much recording of it. And then we want to train the enforcers so they become more informed, as well as increase public awareness of the illegality of wildlife smuggling. So we know that wildlife smuggling is a huge and complex topic, but we just decided that we want to focus at least on one aspect, and that is the educating of the enforcers about the wildlife and the laws that pertain to wildlife in the country. We do know that there are some agencies that do have a strong knowledge, but there are others that still require some help. What we would like to do with regards to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force is probably work with the new recruits and develop a curriculum that could assist in getting them to know the wildlife in the country before they move into other areas in the Defense Force organization, as well as hopeful of a better collaboration between us and the agents. Okay, and with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to all of these very special people who I was gathering information from to help me with this project. Thank you.